Imagine waking up to the blinding light of an atomic bomb, a moment that forever alters the course of history and leaves scars that time cannot heal. Survivors of Hiroshima, the last witnesses of nuclear devastation, are sounding the alarm again. With a nuclear arms race on the horizon, their message is clear. We are closer to the brink than ever before. Welcome to That's Life, I swear. This podcast is about life's happenings in this world that conjure up such words as intriguing, frightening, life-changing, inspiring, and more. I'm Rick Barron, your host. That said, here's the rest of this story. Before I start, I want to point out that I found this story from an article I read in the New York Times. And I want to make sure I give credit to the writers because they did a great job pulling this story together. Their names: Kathleen Kingsbury, W.J. Hennigan, and Spencer Cohen. Now let me give you a little warning. Some of the comments in this story are disturbing to hear. The fears of nuclear catastrophe that haunted the Cold War era have resurfaced. According to the Associated Press in 2023 alone, the 9 nuclear-armed countries such as the United States, Russia, and China collectively invested $91.4 billion in expanding and upgrading their arsenals. Now, this renewed focus on nuclear armaments has significantly heightened the risk of global conflicts, spiraling into an unimaginable devastation. Nuclear weapons haven't been this central to international affairs since the Cold War, remarked Wilfred Wong of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Knowing this trend of nuclear buildup around the world makes one wonder what the Hiroshima survivors that are alive today thought of the very first atomic blast that hit them on August 6th of 1945. Today's survivors of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima are now in their 80s to mid-90s. I mean, what goes through their minds? What horrific terror did they experience then, and even to this very day? What compelled me to share this story with you is to share the thoughts of some of those survivors. At the time of the blast, some were 15, 4, and one was born 8 months after the blast. Their simple comments that you will hear should give us deep concern. Now let me provide an analogy of how the power of the atomic bomb has magnified since 1945. Imagine the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945 as a single matchstick being struck in a dark room. It creates a terrifying burst of light and heat that obliterates everything in its immediate vicinity. Now, compare that to the power of a modern atomic bomb in 2024, which would be like setting off an entire forest fire in the same room. The scale of destruction, the intensity of heat, and the far-reaching consequences will be exponentially greater, engulfing everything in a much wider radius and leaving behind devastation on an almost unimaginable scale. The dawn of the atomic age brought contrasting outcomes for two nations. While America celebrated a decisive military triumph, Japan was dealing with unimaginable destruction. Nearly 8 decades have passed since the morning of August 6, 1945, when the skies above Hiroshima were forever changed at 8:15 a.m. Now, the survivors of this cataclysmic event now face a haunting question. Has humanity gleaned wisdom from their suffering, or are global powers blindly stumbling toward a similar catastrophe? As the world reflects on this anniversary, the echoes of Hiroshima serve as both a warning and a plea for a more peaceful future. Now, in the center of Hiroshima today, the Red Cross Hospital's waiting area tells a silent story. Its seats are filled with elderly patients, their faces etched with a history few can comprehend. These aren't ordinary medical cases. They're the living testament to a day that forever changed the course of human history. August 6th may pass unnoticed for many Americans, but is a date seared in the national conscience in Japan. Even now, nearly 8 decades later, this Red Cross hospital tends to approximately 180 individuals every single day. Known as hibakusha, Japanese for survivors of the atomic blast. 1945 saw 2 nations locked in a bitter struggle, united in the pursuit of victory. When the skies over Hiroshima erupted with unimaginable force on that fateful August morning, it marked a turning point. For Americans, it announced the dawn of a new era, a demonstration of unprecedented technological might that would shape global politics for generations to come. But in the streets of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where a second bomb fell just 72 hours later, a different narrative echoes. Here the focus is not on power gained, but on humanity lost. The survivors and their descendants carry a solemn message: never again. The toll was staggering. An estimated 200,000 lives were extinguished and countless others forever altered. Hiroshima saw 2/3 of its buildings reduced to rubble. In Nagasaki, homes within a 1.5-mile radius simply ceased to exist. Hospitals, schools, and the very fabric of urban life were ripped into pieces in an instant. These cities, once vibrant communities, were transformed into stark reminders of warfare's ultimate cost. Today they stand as living memorials, their scars a testament to their resilience and a plea for peace. In the aftermath of World War II, a stark contrast emerged in how the atomic bombings were perceived across the Pacific. There was national relief at the war's end and pride in technological supremacy the United States of America now possessed. A Gallup poll conducted in the wake of the blast revealed a staggering 85% of Americans supported the decision to unleash nuclear power on Japan. Now, this perspective, rooted in necessity and sacrifice, proved remarkably resilient. Even as decades passed and global attitudes shifted, many in the United States clung to a narrative prioritizing military achievement over human cost. The tenacity of this viewpoint came into sharp focus as the 50th anniversary of the war's conclusion approached. The Smithsonian Institute, a beacon of American culture and history, was embroiled in controversy. Its planned exhibition, which aimed to present a more complex and nuanced portrayal of the conflict, including a critical examination of the atomic bombings, faced fierce opposition. Pressure mounted from veterans groups and their families, who saw any questioning of the bomb's morality as an insult to those who had fought and died. The debate reached the highest echelons of government, with the Senate passing a resolution that branded the proposed exhibition as supportive and offensive. Lawmakers demanded that the Smithsonian avoid any portrayal that might impugn the memory of America's fallen heroes. Ultimately, the museum capitulated, significantly scaling back its plans. This episode underscored a deeply entrenched reluctance in American society to re-examine long-held beliefs about the war's conclusion, despite evolving historical perspectives. Now, a different narrative unfolded in the land of the rising sun. The survivors of the atomic blast and their descendants have become the living custodians of a grim history. Their mission is not one of vengeance, but of prevention. These individuals carry a burden few can comprehend: the physical and psychological scars of nuclear devastation, coupled with the weight of survivor's guilt and societal stigma. Their collective voice rises with increasing urgency as time moves on. With an average age of 85, these living witnesses to history are fading away at an alarming rate. Hundreds each month are silenced forever. Yet, as the numbers dwindle, the world seems to be sleepwalking toward a chilling revival of nuclear proliferation. Global superpowers, the United States, China, and Russia, are pouring astronomical sums into modernizing their nuclear arsenals. The delicate web of treaties and agreements that once kept the nuclear threat at bay is unraveling, strand by strand. Diplomatic efforts to mend these crucial safeguards appear stagnant. We stand at a crossroads. The specter of nuclear conflict, once thought consigned to history books, looms once more on the horizon. As another August 6th passes, marking yet another year since that fateful day in Hiroshima, a clarion call echoes across continents. Now more than ever, it is imperative for the world to lend its ear to these last remaining voices from Ground Zero. Their testimonies serve not just as historical accounts, but as stark warnings of what may come if we fail to heed the lessons of the past. Time is running out. Soon there will be no one left who can speak firsthand of the horrors unleashed by nuclear weapons. It falls to us, Americans and global citizens alike to ensure their stories are heard and deeply understood and acted upon. In their words lies perhaps our best hope of preventing history's darkest chapter from repeating itself. Now, here are a few survivors who shared their thoughts of that terrible day. Again, let me give you a warning. What follows are comments that are very disturbing to hear. Chiko Karihaki. She was on a break from her job at a tobacco factory in Hiroshima. She was just 15 years old. Her words: everything was burned. People were walking around with their clothes burned off, their hair scorched and standing on end. Their faces were so swollen that you couldn't tell who was who. Their lips were swollen too swollen to speak. Their skin would fall off and hang off their hands at their fingernails, like an inside-out glove, all black from the mud and ash. It was almost like they had black seaweed hanging from their hands. But I was thankful that some of my classmates were alive, that they were able to make their way back. Swarms of flies came and laid eggs in the burns of many, which would hatch, and the larvae would start squirming inside the skin. They couldn't stand the pain. They cry and plead, "Get these larvae out of my skin." The larvae would feast on the blood and pus and get plump and squirm. I didn't dare use my hands, so I brought my chopsticks and picked them out individually, but they kept hatching inside the skin. I spent hours picking those larvae out of my classmates. Hiro Kawashimo. Her mother was at home in Hiroshima. Hiro was born 8 months later. On August 6, 1945, I wasn't born yet. I was in my mother's womb. My mother was around half a mile from ground zero when she was exposed to the bomb's radiation in Hiroshima. According to her mother, Hiro was born several months later, weighing 500 grams, apparently so small she could fit in a rice bowl. I was one of many children exposed to the bomb while in the womb and diagnosed with microcephaly, a smaller head. Saji Takaru. At home with his mother in Hiroshima, he was just 4 years old. His words: I remember the burnt smell. I was 4 years old, and I don't really remember the immediate symptoms. But some years later, I had boils on my legs, and they didn't heal for a long time. That made me really hate going to school. Later, the lymph nodes in my armpits and legs swelled up, and I had to have them cut open 3 times. Kaneko Sakuma. Kaneko was at home with his mother in Hiroshima and was 9 months old. His words: there are people today who still find it difficult to talk about what they experienced. It could be their advanced age or they don't feel up to it physically. Often they just don't feel well, even though they don't know why. The atomic bomb is such an inhuman weapon, and the effects of radiation stay with survivors for a very long time. That's why they need our continued support. Minoru Harakachi. Minoru's mother was at home. His father was at work next to the Hiroshima station and never came home. He was born 7 months later. His words: for the first time, at 21, I was officially recognized as an atomic bomb survivor. But I hated that. Why should I be labeled as a survivor when I was born after the bomb, 12 miles away from the epicenter? I hated even looking at the atomic bomb survivor's health handbook, and I quickly put it away in my desk drawer. I didn't want the discrimination, and I didn't want the pity. Until I was in my 50s, I didn't tell anyone that I was a survivor. Lastly, Shigeki Mori. Shigeki was crossing the bridge on his way to school in Hiroshima. His wife, Keiko, is also a survivor. He was 8, and she was 3. His words: people still don't get it. The atomic bomb isn't a simple weapon. I speak as someone who suffers until this day. The world needs to stop nuclear war from ever happening again. But when I turn on the news, I see politicians talk about deploying more weapons, more tanks. How could they? I wish for the day that they stop. In 2016, history was made as Barack Obama became the first sitting U.S. president to set foot in Hiroshima. While many in Japan had hoped for an official apology, Obama's visit offered something different: recognition. Standing within the rebuilt city, he invited the world to confront the horror of that August morning. Obama said, and I quote, "We force ourselves to feel the dread of children confused by what they see. We listen to a silent cry." End quote. He was acknowledging that words cannot summarize such profound suffering. Obama's speech also carried a sense of urgency. He recognized that the voices of survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are fading, their first-hand accounts slipping away with each passing year. Yet he emphasized that the memory of August 6, 1945, must endure, serving as a wall against complacency and a catalyst for change. Now, the Smithsonian, once again, is preparing to create a World War II exhibition focused on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The torch is being passed, and it falls to a new generation to bear witness, to listen to the stories of the survivors while they still can, and to channel that understanding into a commitment to a world free from nuclear threats. The calls to action challenge us to confront history's darkest chapters and forge a path towards a more peaceful future. As the survivors' voices gradually fade, we must ensure their message resonates louder than ever. So what can we learn from this story? What's the takeaway? Well, it's pretty simple. The threat of a nuclear arms race is building. What would it feel like to live through a nuclear attack today? Well, one thing is for sure. The living will envy the dead. Well, there you go, my friends. That's life, I swear. For further information regarding the material covered in this episode, I invite you to visit my website, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, for show notes and the episode transcript. As always, I thank you for the privilege of you listening and your interest. Be sure to subscribe here or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. See you soon.